Hi, and welcome to the Whitby Public Library's presentation of garden planning. This is a recording of a program that we provided live earlier at the end of May. And it was so darn good, and we didn't record it then that we thought we would and share it with you now so that you can enjoy this when you have the time and maybe even plan your garden for next year. By the way, my name is Sue and I work at the Whitby Public Library. I'm just going to be facilitating this recording. In a moment, I'm going to hand it over to our host, Alex, who also works at the Whitby Public Library. And I want to call her a gardener extraordinaire, but I'll just say that her passion is gardening. And she is here to share some of her knowledge with us. So Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Sue. This is really exciting to get to do this again. Glad that the turnout was really good and we had good responses. So happy to share it with you. All right, so garden planning. Now, the intent of this program is to provide some questions to you if you're planning a garden for the first time, if you are a gardener and ran into some troubles and need some guidelines or framework to get you back on track, perhaps some questions to sort out some problems that you might have run into. Or if you're just at home this summer and that you want to spend some time beautifying your space to make it enjoyable, productive, and just overall nice to spend some time in. So let's get started. So you're here watching this because you want to garden, which is the first step, I'd say, in deciding that you want to start a garden. There's so many reasons for it. We'll get into some of those a little later. I'll explain why I garden. I think it's really important to establish why you want to garden as the first step, because it really helps. It helps keep you gardening and keep that motivation. This is our little schedule here. So like I said, we're going to talk about why I garden. Because this was a live program previously, we did a live poll activity. We will just show the results of that. It was a really good turnout, so we'll get to that. And then we'll get into the questions. So where to start, what plants to choose, what you might need, and then going forward in the future and some resources that you might find useful. So why I garden? Gardening to me is a chance to connect with nature, connect with family. It's also a learning opportunity. I find that most of my experience comes from gardening with my grandfather, and he's taught me a lot. So it's a way to spend time with him, learn about gardening, and it gives a great chance to just get out there, get in nature. It's also very physical. Depending on the type of gardening you do, it can be quite physical. If you're churning up the dirt, doing any digging, or building any sort of garden structures, it's as physical as you want it to be. So it's a great way to get exercise. It's a great way to get outside. Another reason it's fun is because you get to grow what you want to eat. So it's a healthy habit to have, knowing where your food comes from and growing it so that you can eat it and share it with family as well. Just some pictures of my garden experiences. So I garden indoors and outdoors. These are all outdoors. And I don't have any from indoors, but my outdoor experience, so you can see my garden with my grandfather here, and then some flowers. Another reason that gardening to me is really important is that I purposely choose plants that are suggested for pollinators. So providing environments or flowers, food for pollinators is really important because they do a very important job of pollinating all our plants and we rely on them greatly. So it's very important to me. So this was our live poll activity, and I'm just going to show you the result, and that's here. I hope you can see it all. So some really good responses here. Essentially, what we asked of our participants was to name 3 things or 3 sentences explaining what gardening means to them. And from looking at this, I agree with almost everything in here. It is definitely satisfying. It's meditative. It's a necessity. And the biggest word, so with a live word poll, the way it works is the bigger the word, the more often it was mentioned in the responses. So the biggest one here is find. And I think it means that we find a lot of benefits in gardening, or we find time and we discover things that way. So I think it's really important, and some happy faces in there too. Anyways, it was a fun activity. So let's get into where we start. So if this is your first time starting a garden, or if you're starting from scratch, maybe you started before, this is where we're going to talk about some things to consider before you start digging. So the first thing that you should be doing is identifying your goal or your purpose for your garden. If you want to pause the video here and think about that before we go forward, it might help you think about your garden as we go through the other questions. But either way, once you know what type of garden you want, it makes it a lot easier to work towards it. So you might want a garden for flowers. You might want it for vegetables. You might want a green garden, you have a shady area maybe in your yard, and you want something to fill the space and just make it feel like a nice place to be. So that goes into our next point, which is location. Depending on what location you have, that can determine what type of garden you can put there. Certain gardens are better suited to different locations. So if you have a shadier yard, you'll definitely benefit more shady plants than plants that like sun, which would do better in a sunnier spot. So this might take a little bit of work, because if you're not sure what your location or yard is like, maybe you've just moved into a new house or backyard, or you've decided to start a garden, but you've never thought about the sun patterns in the yard. It just takes a few days to figure out where the sun mostly sits in the yard. You can go out there and just track the sun every few hours to see where gets the most sun, where gets the most shade, how many hours, and then you can know what type of yard you have. So location can also mean, sorry, we're going to go back a point, talk about location a bit more. It can also mean what type of soil you have, as well as where the water sits in the yard. So like I said, if you're familiar with your area, this you might already be familiar with where the water sits, where the sun goes. If it's new, then you will need to figure out what type of soil there is. Most plants prefer a well-draining soil, so they don't want water that sits or anything. So if you have an eaves trough that drains into your yard, that will affect the type of soil that's there, as well as what plants you might be able to grow or not. So types of plants, this is here because you're going to want to decide what you want to grow. And by this I mean either flowers or vegetables or shrubs or whatever type of garden you want. Once you know what you're working with, what type of garden you want, that's when you can start picking out what's going to go in it, your budget, how much you want to spend on this. That's all important to establish before you start digging, before you get into anything. So where to start? It's ideal if this is your first time to start small, because gardening, like I said, can be quite a lot of effort if you aren't used to it or if you're not sure where you're starting. It's always possible to expand it later. So no matter what, start small, especially if you're considering a vegetable garden. You don't want to grow more than you can consume because it's a lot of work and then it'll be wasted. So flower gardens, vegetable gardens, definitely think about how much you can care for, how much time you can devote to it. And if you want more, you can do that later. Or if you decide this is about enough for me, then that's good. Or if it's too much, you'll have to scale it back. So rather than spending the time and the effort to put it all in the beginning, go with what you can do. Mapping it out is important if you want to keep track of where you've planted things, especially if you're using seeds. You'll want to map out where you've planted what seeds. But this can also help when you're designing a garden. So if you have a specific theme or style of garden in mind, there are techniques that you can use to make your garden look a certain way. They often say it's recommended to plant in drifts of plants or odd numbers rather than one of each. Certain gardening styles have definitely stood the test of time, and it can work out a little better if you want to follow those rules. But ultimately, you should really be planting what you want, as long as it adheres to where those plants can grow. Then I think you're on the right track. Oh, I mentioned budget before. This would be, I guess, where you establish how much you want to spend. I can talk a little bit more about that. Depending on what you're intending to purchase, if you have to purchase plants, certain plants cost more than others. So for instance, you'll have annuals versus perennials. So annuals are plants that grow that year. You plant them, they either make flowers or vegetables, and then they die off at the end of the year and you pull them out. Annuals can be a little bit cheaper in terms of flowers. However, they're a cost that you have to spend every year if that's the type of garden that you have. So on the other hand, you have perennials, which will come back each year, and they require a little more work though, because you have to cut them back, make sure they're protected over the winter, etc. So keep that into your consideration. You can also trade plants with friends if it's perennials. Part of the perennial care is splitting them every once in a while. So if you have friends who you want to trade plants with, that would be a good option. So we're on to choosing plants. Oops, there we go. So first we're going to talk about how to choose plants. So these are questions to ask yourself when it comes time to decide on your plants. You want to think about what you want. In terms of flowers or vegetables, you want to choose what you want. Don't just buy stuff at the store because you think, oh, I can grow this, or this one's cheaper than this one. And ultimately, you're the one who's going to be working on these and spending your time to water them and weed them. And it should be something that you really want to see in your garden. Especially with vegetables, it's going to create a vegetable that you will then have to consume or give away or can maybe you're gardening to preserve for the winter. Make sure it's something that you enjoy eating or something that your family enjoys eating. And in the same breath, make sure it's manageable for you. So I'm referring to numbers here. Certain plants produce more or less than other plants. So depending on what it is, you might not need as many. And you also want to keep that in check in terms of how much maintenance and watering it'll require. You might not need 50 tomato plants, but maybe you really like lettuce or cucumbers and you want to do pickling. So then you would plant more of those. Succession planting is a way to mitigate having all your plants come in at the same time. So if you want to not have all your plants come in at the same time and then have an overabundance of one thing, you can stagger your planting to each week. So this is if you're doing seeds. So this is usually the most useful for lettuce. Lettuce comes in generally in the cooler weather, and by spacing it out by about a week each time, you don't end up with 1 week of all your lettuce being ready and mature to pick. So it just helps with choosing, making some time, I guess, for your plants and for you, time to eat them. We talked about care and maintenance. I think availability is important to consider when you're choosing plants, because you might want to choose things that you can't find at the store. Sometimes there's varieties of certain vegetables or herbs or things like that that you don't see at the store, and that might be worth growing yourself if you're very interested in it. Another thing might be the cost of certain vegetables. I remember, I think it was last year, that celery was very expensive for some reason. So I decided I'm going to grow some celery myself. I didn't get as much as I probably wanted, but it was an interesting experience to get to grow it. But either way, it's something to consider. So here I have some easy flowers that might be good to try if you're new to growing flowers or gardening in general. Now there's a mix here between annuals and then some bulb plants. So bulbs would come back each year, like the daffodils. Oops, I've lost my screen here. Hold on. There we go. Other ones that you can purchase at the store as a plant, or you can start them by seed. They're fun to see grow. So just some ideas there. And then the same for vegetables. You can get some ideas there. And this Swiss chard is actually the one that I grew. I have a funny story about Swiss chard. The first year that I bought Swiss chard from the store, they were started plants already, which is, I think there's often some people who prefer to start by seed, and then some people who start with started plants. I don't see any sort of difference in terms of gardening. I believe if you're gardening, then you're doing a good thing. So the story about Swiss chard I have is that I purchased these Swiss chard plants. I'd never had Swiss chard before or grown it before, but I thought, oh, this will be great. And they were so small. They were so tiny in the little started pot at the store. So I bought a few little containers of it. And then when I got home, I realized they were supposed to be spaced out. And I thought, oh, okay, well, it's a good thing that my grandfather has all this space. We'll have enough room for the Swiss chard. But we ended up having so much Swiss chard that I had to give most of it away, because they grow quite large. Their start might be about here, but you're going to end up with quite a bit. The good news is it shrinks like spinach does when you cook it, so it doesn't take up a lot of room that way, but it was definitely a learning experience. It's a good thing we all like Swiss chard. All right, moving on to what you need. So here we're going to talk about materials, tools, and some other things to consider if you're starting. And then we'll get into talking about what you can reuse or repurpose. So we have plants, tools, and materials. You might need to invest in some seeds or starts, whatever way you choose to go. If you're doing seeds, you might need some small pots. Now you can definitely reuse items to be your small pots. As long as it's going to drain and not sit with the water, then it's a good way to go. tools that are a very good idea to have or invest in are some gloves, a shovel, some sort of weeding tool or rake, a method of watering, and then a rake for, I guess, at the end of the season. And then other materials which would help depending on what you're growing, soil compost, fencing, and maybe some stakes depending how high your plants grow. So if you already have stuff at home, I always recommend using what you have. It's budget friendly as well as better for the environment if you don't have to purchase something new. Leads me to my point about just making sustainable choices in general, either in your materials. So for instance, I have a photo somewhere, but I think it's later on in the presentation, using old plant pots to start your new plant pot. So say you buy started plants, you put those in the garden. You can recycle the pots. Usually garden centers have a pot recycle that you can bring your trays back. So you can do that, or you could take some of those and then use them for next year's garden if you're planning on doing your plants again, saving your seeds or buying seeds and starting them in there. Just makes it pretty cyclical. And thinking about the future in terms of the tools that you're using and how well they're going to last and how much that will affect you or your garden. Here's the picture. It's this is my grandfather's compost heap. Now he makes a type of cold frame on top of it because compost generates heat. So it's a great place to start plants. So he just has tomato plants here in old flower pots that were from previous flowers. So he's using those to just start his seeds in the compost. And this is just what I'm referring to, using what you have. Plant labels, you can definitely use what comes with the plant, or you can easily make some out of popsicle sticks or other markers that might be fun. Like if you want to paint them or even paint some rocks too, that's, I've seen some really cute ideas for painting plant markers on rocks, and then they're very reusable. And plant ties. So for this one, I like to recommend try not to use anything that is stronger than the plant itself. So for a plant that is obviously a natural fiber, you don't want to use like a metal tie or anything that could potentially cut the plant. So you're going to want to use something softer, such as strips of fabric, old pantyhose, or even the leaves of other plants. If you take like the leaves from some irises, they do really well actually as plant ties, and then at the end of the season they just fall off and decompose in the dirt. All right, so you've started your garden and everything's in the ground, and at this point you're asking yourself, now what? So what's important is to make a routine of it. Maybe you go out first thing in the morning and check on your garden. Maybe you go out at night and check it on your garden. Either way, it has to become a part of your daily routine. And that can be affected by your lifestyle or your work, or if you have children. So think about how gardening fits into your routine and ultimately make it work for you. This might tie into deciding on how big a garden or how much work you think you can handle, depending on how much time you can give to it. Part of that routine is watering as well as weeding. Watering, different plants need different amounts depending on what the plant is. So whatever you choose to grow, make sure you know how much water it needs. You probably don't have to water every day, but it depends on the weather. Something I learned in the process of doing all these presentations and research is that plants typically need about an inch of water a week, which is a lot less than I thought. And I'm sure that might surprise some other people too. But like I said, it depends on the weather, especially during a heat wave, or the type of garden that you have, whether it's in the ground, in a bed, a raised bed, or a container, will determine how much water it needs. Pots or containers typically dry out a lot faster because they're not in the ground. And especially if they're on a patio or a deck, maybe there's not a lot of shade there, it will need more attention in terms of watering. When I talk about weeding, ultimately it's just important to weed when you see it, when the seeds or when the weeds are small. Otherwise, they just take the nutrients from your soil, and then that will take it away from your plants. So once your plants come in, harvesting is the most fun part. And then that goes hand in hand with seed saving. So I'll talk about seed saving first and then harvesting. Seed saving, if you're intending to save your seeds to use for future years or to share so that other people can grow plants too, you're going to want to decide on that before you, what I mean is keep that in mind when you're planning your garden. If you're intending to grow for seed, you might have to grow a little bit more because depending on the plant, it might only be used for seed. So what I mean for that is like beans. If you're taking the beans out and saving them for seeds, there goes that bean. This doesn't apply so much to tomatoes or cucumbers because you can essentially just, when those are ripe and ready, you can take the seed out and eat the fruit as well. Either way, keep that in mind when you're harvesting your plants. Some seeds have to stay longer than they would normally, longer than it would go if we were just planning to eat them. That's what I mean. And then what I enjoy best about this part is watching it grow. And I love taking pictures of my garden. All the pictures, 99% of the pictures in this presentation I took myself. It is good to document it because it helps you learn for next time or keep a record of what you did last time, how it went, how it grew. And then you can learn from that or just track your progress as a gardener and then share with your friends because everybody loves looking at gardening pictures. That's what I'm learning. Okay. So that is the end of my presentation. Happy gardening if you are just starting out or picking up again. And I'll show the resources I have here. So some of these were where I got some of my points. Just gives you a general idea about some of the questions that I talked about. And if you're wondering about hardiness zone, that's something that comes up when you're purchasing plants. They usually say will grow in zone, and then it'll have some numbers. So depending where you live, certain plants will do better or worse, and it has to do with the temperature. And then I always like to reference Durham Integrated Growers. Their dig bits are all sorts of tips and facts about gardening, which are great to check out if you're interested in pursuing that. Okay.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. I was working away, and it was kind of like it was exactly like listening to a blog.
Awesome.
You've got a voice for radio and a face for TV.
Thank you, Sue.
My pleasure. Thank you again for doing this. Lots of great information. And thank you for watching our video, folks out there. you will see that this is our second video on gardening at this moment. And it will be joined by a third video on gardening within the next couple of weeks. And you'll see all kinds of other great videos on our YouTube channel. Also, tons of great resources, of course, at the library for your gardening needs. And you can place anything you like on hold through our library website or by giving us a call at the library. Again, thank you so much. And I guess we'll sign off for now and have a great summer and good luck with your gardens. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.